Hello, friends. Welcome back to Training. Today is Thursday, April 24th, 9:45 or so as we're recording. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I feel like you're usually cold and I'm usually a little warm, so I'm wearing the sweater. You got the T-shirt on today. I feel like we're switching roles again.
Well, this truth be told, like the only thing I have available is the same jacket I wore last week, and so it's like, do you want to like? I mean, no one would notice.
Yes.
But maybe one person, and so for that reason, because of my neurosis, I'm like, I can't wear the same thing.
Nice. Okay. Well, good. I was getting worried about you. Your body temperature is not correct today.
You know what it is though? So I gave up coffee for Lent, and so coffee's back in the grind now. I feel like I'm warmer.
That makes sense.
I was drinking tea, so it wasn't like it was a huge change. But yeah, I'm not as cold as I was last week. So I think maybe coffee has something to do with it. I don't know.
Could be.
That's the working theory.
It seems plausible. Seems plausible. All right, Joe. Well, there's obviously a lot going on, and really, one of the big things that we try to do is find places where faith and culture kind of overlap, and things that we can talk about with that, right?
Yes.
So, one of the biggest stories this week and probably this year, honestly, is the death of Pope Francis. He passed away on Monday. Obviously, we're not Catholic, but faith and the faith figures in the news, and I think we could just talk about that a little bit. And
yes.
I think it'd be good fodder for conversation. So I had a kind of funny conversation with my neighbor yesterday.
Okay, all right.
So I have an older guy. I don't think he has any faith background at all, but he knows I work at a church.
Okay.
And so I was working out in the yard yesterday, and he was working out in his yard, and he was like, "Hey, who's going to be the next pope?" And I think in his mind, I work at a church, so clearly I know stuff about the Pope, right?
That's right.
He doesn't. I don't think he necessarily knows Protestant, evangelical, Catholic, whatever. I think he doesn't really know the differences. So I was like, I don't know, man. I couldn't tell you one cardinal. I have no idea. I don't even know if cardinal is the right word. Is that the right word? So we had a funny little back and forth about how ignorant I am about the church. But he just kind of assumed because I work at a church, I know all about this stuff.
Yes.
So
yeah.
And Francis was an interesting figure.
Yeah.
You and I think we both listened to, there's a daily news podcast, and they did kind of an overview of his life and his legacy. And probably most people around the world really liked him. He's kind of a likable guy. He was probably out in the public more than recent popes. He made a lot of statements about a lot of different things. He was kind of just more visible than a lot of recent popes. And he also seemed to have a little bit of a sense of humor, kind of lighthearted, more than people may have expected. Yeah. Mm-hmm. A few months ago, he had a bunch of the world's biggest comedians come visit him in the Vatican just for a visit. So,
and if I'm correct, we broke that story wide open here on Training.
I think we were the first to cover it.
We were.
Fallon called me, I called you, and we talked about it here.
Yeah.
But
yes,
but he's kind of unique because I think a lot of people kind of in the middle of the political spectrum really liked him. Mm-hmm. Pretty far, more conservative people didn't like him. More liberal people didn't like him because he kind of hinted that he was going to make a lot of kind of progressive changes. So some of the people on the left were kind of excited about that, but they didn't really actually change very much. And
right.
People who were on the more conservative side were kind of afraid that he might make some changes, even though he never really did. So he's kind of one of those figures where if you're kind of obviously right or left, maybe you didn't like him very much, but everybody in the middle was kind of just at least drawn to him because he was an interesting figure.
Yeah.
What are some of your kind of main takeaways of Francis and his legacy?
Yeah, I guess we zoom out and just take a look at the position and office of the Pope itself.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, it comes from an interpretation in the middle of Matthew where Jesus talks about, Peter's going to be given the keys to the kingdom, right? And so Roman Catholic friends have this doctrine of apostolic succession. So they believe that from Peter, like there's been this handing off of this authority that continues to this day. And so I think it's a neat institution. They have always found that it was wise to have one person in the middle of their tradition.
Yeah.
This person has great weight, obviously. They do have to, prove there is a proving ground for these characters. It's not like, do you know all the right people and were you the son of so and so?
Yeah.
But you have to be dedicated to the scholarship of the church. You have to have served in ministry. Kind of make your way through the ranks in order to kind of be considered here. So, I mean, after they go through the grieving process, they will go into seclusion and they begin to look for who's going to come after Father Francis. I actually heard that. So there's a bishop of an Anglican church in Hutchinson, Quentin Moore, Bishop Quentin Moore. He actually got to visit the Vatican.
Okay.
He spent a little bit of time with Francis.
That's cool.
And one of the things that he admired him. He enjoyed the time that they had. But one of the things that I took from my conversation with Quentin Moore was that Father Francis wanted to be called Father Francis, not the Pope. Like he wanted to take that lowly position.
Yeah.
There's all these fantastic stories of where he could have had the luxury of the office,
Yeah.
and he resisted it all.
Yeah.
Again and again, like spurned the gifts that were given to him, the privileges. He just continued to push them aside.
Even his burial, right? Like
Yes.
he's choosing not to have an ornate casket where he could have, a very significant ceremony, but he wants to be very minimal, very. I think I can't remember what the daily said, but I think that his casket just says Francis, right?
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yes.
So yeah, definitely a humble guy.
Fantastic, and it's any chance he could, he took the low road. I think the road of humility,
Yeah.
which is so praiseworthy, particularly at a time like ours where people are self-aggrandizing. I mean, it's been in every age, but like it certainly is apparent today. And like he, I think that probably comes from his background. He was the first pope from Latin America in 1,000 years or something. Like it's like ridiculously long time, and also because he's from the Franciscan order. We think about Saint Francis and how he had this big vow of poverty, was one with nature, really had very minimal possessions, and so he lived into those ideals. He didn't use those ideals to, virtue signal. That's really who he was.
Yeah.
I remember early on, there's this picture of him giving a kiss on the cheek of this person who was, in line to kind of watch the Pope go by. This person was, misformed in his face, kind of like elephantitis, and like he just gives him this great big kiss on the cheek, and it was such a striking image of like here's a person of power, like humbling himself and embracing someone who probably wasn't embraced by many people in their life.
Yeah.
The fact that the Pope would do that was something that's so incredible to me.
Yeah.
And so I do think that people admired him. He seemed to have this gravitas. He was out there with the people. I think his confrontation came with maybe American evangelicals on a couple of fronts.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, American Christians continue to grapple with how science and faith interact with one another. And the official position of the Roman Catholic Church does leave room for biological evolution, which some, current evangelicals resist.
Yeah.
But I believe that Francis had science in his background, and so he was just more keen to the Academy of the Guild of Science than just if there is an antagonism between faith and science.
Yeah.
A lot of current modern Christians want to take the faith claim first and then science, they'll back into science. Well, he actually appreciated the science, particularly biological sciences. And so I think that people were a little frustrated by that. I think the other front was just the social issues.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever spoke out of turn in regards to Catholic doctrine, but his tone was different.
Right.
He wasn't, he did not dig in against some of the people on the other side of social issues. And so I think that some American Christians, even some American Catholic Christians, did not appreciate his stance on some issues.
Yeah.
But I think officially he didn't change any doctrine.
Right.
I think he began to opine about should we have female priests and some other issues that would have been groundbreaking if the Roman Catholic Church would have changed their mind on some things. Nothing official.
Yeah.
Right? Like but he simply allowed the conversation to be had.
Yeah.
But that was probably a bridge too far for some people in a day like ours. So wildly popular. I think he was helpful. I think he was a breath of fresh air for many Catholics and many Christians or many faith adjacent people.
Yeah.
And but I do think he left a lasting legacy in like a short tenure, just 8 years or whatever. He was the Pope.
Yeah.
Right. And so it'll be interesting to see what the church does from here. Do they go back to more of a European territory Pope like was precedent?
Yep.
Someone who maybe stands more firmly in not just the doctrine but the tone of the Roman Catholic Church for the last 500 years, or do they continue down this road of no, the church is bigger than Europe, and so maybe we should entertain some more leadership from different parts of the world where Catholicism is maybe more apparent.
Yeah.
Because it is not as popular in Western Europe as it was maybe 1,000 years ago. And so do we go where the people are, or do we kind of go back to the standard lines from the past several centuries? So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. He was just such an interesting figure because I listened to another podcast where this is before his death, so it was just kind of weird timing, but David Sedaris, who's a comedian and a writer, was on a different podcast I listened to, and he was one of the comedians who was invited to meet him a few months ago. So he was kind of reflecting. Again, this is before his death. He was just reflecting on that a little bit. and Sedaris is very openly not a Christian, very kind of antagonistic a little bit. But he said, obviously, he and I disagree on a lot of things, but I like this guy. Like he appreciated how he was open to dialogue and wanting to help the poor and some of these things that, really, regardless of religion, we can all get behind. But yeah, anytime you take a stance, you're going to be a polarizing figure.
Yes. Yes.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, we talked about this briefly at the top, we didn't get very far, but just the idea of having a central leadership figure in the church is interesting, yes. I think, because we, as evangelicals, as Protestants, we don't have a person who makes wide decisions like that in yes. American Christianity. What are some pros and cons that you see about that? Because there's sometimes I definitely see the danger in it. I think there's also times where it's helpful to have a voice leading, right? So
yes.
This is one of those things where I see pros and cons. I think I'm in the favor of not having a figurehead like that.
Yes.
Because I think the pros probably outweigh the cons. But that is just an interesting thing to have a person leading a large group of people. Do you have anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything led by personality is good until it's not, right? When there's one person in the middle who can kind of synthesize all of the discussion from that inner circle and then make a call.
Yeah.
Of course, there's efficiency, there's speed, there's clarity. It's not like one person makes a call and then another person can kind of like over nuance it to where now we got to get back together and chat about it again. No, we get a direction and we could go. It's kind of like a head coach on a team or a CEO of an organization. We make a call and we can go with it. And of course, we should evaluate along the way. But ultimately, we need someone just to call the shot, and there's, I think, some power in that. But what happens if that person's personality wanes and they become toxic and they lead a group or an organization or even a religion down a different path, an unhealthy one? Then it's hard to stop them. It's hard to put roadblocks in the way for that process. And so I do think that, the Roman Catholic Church has always been big, and there's always been internal struggles because people want to push it this way and that. And even when the Pope lands on something, you still hear stories of, churches, even dioceses, this part of the world kind of continues to go their own direction. And then there's now like this evaluation of should we stop them or not? And so there's always going to be great parity when something is, quite large, many people involved, like the Roman Catholic Church. And so I do think that it's what they've decided to go with. There's advantages, a lot of disadvantages too. And so, but I think when the Protestant Reformation said, we don't like the way of the church going the way of an individual like a pope, we would like to have a different entity. And they put the Bible in the Pope's place. Yeah. That seemed like a good idea, but what's happened since then? There's been so many fractures of the church, 30,000 denominations or something like that. And it's because what was assumed that would kind of help clarify things and bring unity is continuing to fracture, the one body of Christ. Yeah. And so, maybe, having several people in the middle isn't all that is cracked up to be as well, right? But in the mystery of it all, God continues to lead the church, whether that's with, a central figurehead like the Roman Catholic Church and then bishops throughout regions, or if that's through committees. In the mystery of it all, through our mistakes and through the ways in which we fumble the ball, we still move forward and we look back and go, God's doing great things. And because that we marvel, we can't quite understand why. And so we just continue to go where we felt called and led, and then give our very best and ask for God's help and grace along the way. And God continues to build the church. Right? So
that's good. One more kind of big picture question before we start to wrap up here. Sure. So I think some people watching or listening right now might be confused that we're even talking about this because we're not Catholic. And some people, why are you guys talking about the Pope? And I know that obviously throughout history, there's been a lot of conflict between Protestants and Catholics, obviously. And so there's kind of this historical battle between these groups. I think that's probably not as intense today as it obviously has been in the past. But I think there's still this a little bit of like, oh, you guys aren't really Christians, or no, you don't really understand the true. And whenever there's faith differences, that's probably inevitable. Yeah. And I'm glad that I'm glad that we're not in quite as cutthroat of a culture, I don't think, as far as that goes anymore. But some people listening might have some questions, or should we even be talking about this, or why are we even talking about them? They're not like us. They claim some things we think they're wrong. Sure. some of the Protestant-Catholic divide stuff, anything like that we should talk about today?
Sure. I mean, there's probably still some folks around who question, the faith of Roman Catholic friends. But I think at the center of Christianity is our individual people having a saving experience with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I think that seems to be the very center of Christianity. And I think if a Protestant and a Roman Catholic can say, yes, we stand together on the fact that we're trusting in Christ with our faith, I think that is the foundation that unites us. Sure, there are some major doctrinal differences.
Yeah.
Some that prevent people from saying, I don't know if I could worship at a Protestant church. Or I don't know if I could worship, at a Catholic church because of it. And a lot of them has to do with Eucharist, what exactly is going on in time of communion. I was having a conversation with a Ridgepoint friend in the lobby, and they work with they have a Roman Catholic coworker.
Yeah.
And they got into a pretty spirited discussion about if you don't receive communion this way, are you officially in the body of Christ?
Right.
And so obviously that stuff is not trivial. That's not stuff that we could just laugh at, know? And so there's some discussion to have there. But I don't know. I think it may come down to a lot of our personalities too. If we want to see people included, we're going to find ways to include, whether it's a Roman Catholic friend and including their Protestant friends, or if it's Protestants including the Roman Catholic friends, and finding that ocean of sameness underneath our feet. Where can we unite together? When the Vatican II Council happened in the 20th century, some drastic changes happened in Roman Catholic worship and their interaction with other faith communities.
Okay.
And I believe the language that was spelled out there is that Protestants are separated brethren, which, I don't know, maybe that's a modest middle ground. They still call us the family of God.
Yeah.
But they still feel like there is a great separation between us. And I guess I'm content with that. But I do see, like, as we call this the era of the hyphenates. We probably have talked about before here on Trending. But, there's hardly a bona fide anybody anymore.
Yeah.
And even in the Roman Catholic environment, I do believe that, like, if there's a time machine and Catholics today could go back to, to find Catholics in the 19th century, there would be this great amazement about where the Catholic Church has gone from there to now. Yeah. Right. And so I think that they are emerging too, just like other Christian communities. They're absorbing some evangelical practices within their, community. We see, for instance, more Bible studies happening, which would have been maybe a little more rare, in previous eras of the Roman Catholic faith. The charismatic movement had its great impact on the Roman Catholic Church in the 1960s. There was even there was a couple of watershed moments in the 1960s where, there are people raising their hands during worship during Roman Catholic big meetings at Notre Dame football stadium. People raising their hands and speaking in tongues.
Yeah, wow.
And that would have been something that would have been unheard of for quite a long time. And so I do think that everyone's kind of embracing some of the gifts from other communions. Yeah. And because of that, I think that the faith is, people are becoming more and more comfortable with things that they don't quite understand. Yeah. And I think as attendance trends continue to wane in the Western world, we are less likely to draw battle lines with other Christian communities, but we say, there's enough of us in common. Let's find ways to work together, because there are less and less people attending church today. Yeah. And so why spend the effort to further divide when you can actually unite together and work on some stuff together? Even Billy Graham, I think he struggled with how do we include Roman Catholic Americans in evangelistic work? And he came to the conclusion, no, we need to find ways to work together. So if Billy Graham could decades ago, I think modern Christians should find ways to do it in our time now. And there's just there'd be a lot of joy in finding some ways to unite together. As a hockey coach, we had Roman Catholic kids on our team, and I was coaching them during the time when they were going through their confirmation, their first communion. Okay, and it was so cool, to even have conversations in the locker room about what they're learning in confirmation class. Yeah, and to watch on Facebook when they were taking the first communion, their parents were so proud that they were taking a step of faith. And I found that to be more enjoyable than I wasn't disappointed at all. Yeah, I think it was cool that they were finding their own faith and making it their own. And figuring out what God was calling them to do as, now members of the church, the Roman Catholic Church there. So I don't know. I just think that we should make every effort to find ways of connection in that division. And then when we do have divisive issues and doctrine, let's talk about them with more enthusiasm, with more, the term would be irenic, with a peacemaking initiative in mind instead of drawing battle lines. Because I think it's a wasted effort. It's not something that brings out the best in us, for a time like ours.
And I think it's also good for us to remember that there's so much variety. There's some Roman Catholic churches that probably have fairly similar beliefs. I mean, there are some key differences, but I think there are some Catholics who probably have similar beliefs than we do, and some that are drastically different, and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
There are probably some Catholics would say there's no way that we're Christians, and some of us might say some of those people aren't real Christians. But I think there's some middle ground, right? Whether it's a preference of culture and tradition or whatever. Because I think I've heard Brent say before, some things that Catholics do well, they get the awe and wonder of God, the revering of God, more respect than I think we do. Their services are built around awe, respect, and reverence about God. And they take sin seriously, probably maybe more than we do. So there's things we can learn from each other. We have different parts of the Gospels that we maybe elevate over others. And
yeah,
I think there's room for all of us.
Yeah. Once again, I think it comes out of personality. There are some, and there are gifts from God, people who are meticulous about beliefs and logic and what exactly do you believe and think, and let's talk about our differences. And I think that's good because I think it's an iron sharpening iron, right? Mm-hmm. I think that other personalities are like, I'd rather get along, and that's going to be my posture. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need both because they're both a gift to the church to keep us in that. There's always a tension between unity and holiness in the Christian faith. Like, how can we include as many people as possible, but still call this the one body of Christ? Yep. So we're always, that's the paradox that we continue to work with. Mm-hmm. And so how can we get along, but also how can we make sure that we're staying on the path of following the one Jesus Christ? And I think that we're always going to be wrestling with that tension.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I do think, regardless of where you land on some of the doctrine issues, he was a very humble leader, cared deeply about caring for the poor. I think wherever you land on some of these specifics, there's a lot of good leadership lessons we can learn from Father Francis. So,
some people troll, and they're kind of in that vice signaling, like they like all the stuff that people disagree with, and they just get a kick out of, ruffling feathers and stuff. He took so many takes, that were like, there's like a breath of fresh air, like, oh, I'm so glad, I'm so glad that he would weigh in on that, So I think he went to the contentious places too, but there was like a word of grace for the most part, and he was not perfect by far, and things that we would find disagreement with. There's even like some evidence that maybe with some of these abuse scandals that he wasn't directly involved, but he could have maybe have blown the whistle and maybe didn't.
Right.
And we don't know all the details of why that is. And the Roman Catholic Church, our friends continue to struggle with the outworking of all that. It was a devastating era of the church. Hopefully it's being cleaned up. Hopefully it's being amended, right? Hopefully there's some forgiveness being extended and pleaded for. And so he wasn't perfect. But I think in the balance of it all, I think we'll look back and say, I think we saw the life of Jesus within him. Yeah. And that's all that matters at the end of the day. And we can work with the other stuff for sure. But I think he was a breath of fresh air, a gracious presence in a world like ours.
Yeah. And I think it's also good for us to mourn with those who mourn, right? I have several Catholic friends on Facebook they're mourning. Like, this is a serious loss if you're in that tradition. So I think it's important for us to remember as well.
Yep. Very good.
Okay. Anything else?
We had to hang the phone up, man. These people have stayed here for 30 minutes.
Okay. Well, let's wrap it there.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Okay, we got just a few more of these left, man. So got to treasure up all these last episodes.
Yeah.
So, okay. Absolutely. Thank you, my friends, for watching and listening. We'll hope to see you next time.
See you next time.
Have a good weekend.